Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the CatStrand on behalf of the Glenkens story. My name is Mike Brown. I'm one of the steering group. We're from my briefing there. What do I say next? Yes, emergency exits are left and right. I hope we won't be disturbed. I hope we'll have a smooth afternoon of operation. In a moment I'm going to hand over to my colleague Michael Ansell, who will introduce today's speaker. We also will have a slide up at the end about our next project, which is the history, very different topic, history of music making in the Glenkens, which is our autumn conference event. Equally interesting, very diverse, and I hope you will take note of that as well. Meanwhile, over to Michael Ansell, who will introduce our speaker today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Right, I'll introduce Miriam. Dr. Miriam Bibby is that rare thing, an equine historian, not something I've come across before, an author and an editor. She's the vice president of the Equine History Collective, an international group of equine history scholars, and co-editor-in-chief of Cherion, is that how you pronounce it?
Chiron.
Chiron, the International Journal of Equine and Equestrian History. From 1985 to 2007, she was a tutor and course developer at the University of Manchester's networked learning course in Egyptology. During this time, she gained her MPhil on the topic of the horse in ancient Egypt, and also founded the Ancient Egypt magazine. Miriam worked as a curator of the Clan Armstrong Trust Museum for several seasons and raised funds to develop the Border Reaver Trail in Eskdale and Liddesdale. She's written and edited several books, and her work has been published in numerous journals and magazines. She's also made several appearances on television and radio, some in connection with today's talk. The Galloway Nag or Garran was the topic of Miriam's PhD research, and we are very grateful that she's agreed to come to talk to us about it this afternoon. Please welcome Dr. Miriam Bibby.
Thanks very much. I hope you can all hear me okay. And thanks for the warm welcome on my first, but certainly my last visit to Glenkens, to the Glenkens story. So, yes, that's what I do. I am an odd and rare animal because in my twin passions are history, well, triple passion I suppose, archaeology, history and horses, and I'm lucky enough to combine those in a number of different roles. So, today's topic is what I call Galloway's gift to the world, and this quote is from a poem by an English poet called John Taylor, sometimes called the water poet or the King's water poet. He was a Londoner, and he wrote a poem talking about the nag of nags, as those that knew him say, whose birth and breeding was in Galloway. In other words, a Galloway nag. So what or who was he talking about when he talked about the Galloway Nag? But that will be one of the things to be revealed in the talk. So let's just see if I can get this to work there. Nothing happening. Well done, Miriam. What am I doing wrong?
That's it.
You did it. Killed it. Killed it dead. Right, there we go. Why do we call them Galloways? This is my starting point for the Galloway Nag story, because I think I'm probably going to shock you with my next fact, which is that I'm from Newcastle, and in North East England we call all horses Gallowers. Gallower is a term for a horse. So when I was growing up in Newcastle, I would hear it all the time, particularly amongst miners. I had relatives who were miners, and hill farmers and travelling people. They don't call them horses, they call them Gallowers. So if they say something's a good horse, canny Gallower, that's a canny Gallower, that. So this is what has set me on a lifelong quest to find out more about the Gallower. It's only in the past 6-7 years that I started to formalise that research as the PhD. When I started out, people said, Well, I know a little bit about Galloway. Some people, very few people know about Galloway, but I know it was in Shakespeare, and I don't think you're going to find out anything much more about it than that. And like 170,000 words later. Okay, let's see if we get the next one. Okay, so this is by way of being a sort of, what do you call it, when you kind of reveal the plot a little bit. This is why we call them Galloways. A horse between 13 and 14 hands in height is called a Galloway, from a beautiful breed of little horses once found in the south of Scotland on the shore of the Solway Firth, but now sadly degenerated and almost lost. The pure Galloway was said to be nearly 14 hands high, and sometimes more, of a bright bay or brown, with black legs, small head and neck, and peculiarly deep and clean legs. Its qualities were speed, stoutness and sure-footedness over a very rugged and mountainous country. And well, we know this is rugged and mountainous country. That's William Ewart writing in 1858, when a lot had happened to the horses that were known from Galloway. They've changed quite a lot over the centuries. So in his day, they're already talking about something that is sort of a nostalgic remembrance of something that was there but that isn't there any longer. Okay. Oops, there we go. Did I miss one? There. Okay, so this is my rather average map that I created myself, fiddling about with software. It didn't work terribly well, but it gets the basic gist over it. And a lot of you will know more about Galloway than I do. I've been studying it from other perspectives. You live here, a lot of you, you're on the ground. I'm sure you've got Galloway history in your bones. But the important thing is that this was a region that was extremely appropriate for raising horses. We'll find out more about that later on. Because it had the kind of upland areas with the type of grass that encourage good, healthy, strong horses, and the kind of climate too, and kind of stress factors, I guess you might almost call them, that would bring out the best in the horses and make them strong and enduring. So the landscape is really, really very important when it comes to the Galloway Nag. In a sense, that was what made the Galloway Nag. That and very shrewd breeding from the people in the local area. So we know that there was a famous horse fair at Kelton Hill, and people were bringing down horses from the hills, from all over Galloway really, to the fair and selling them on all over the place. Problem number one for a researcher: we don't know how many, and we don't know which ones were Galloways. So horses are turning up in various texts, including places abroad, places in Spain and Italy and France, that I am pretty sure, my instinct tells me, are actually Scottish horses or Galloway horses, but they're not always called that. This is a big problem for the researcher, identifying the Galloway in Scotland and abroad. And was also obviously a region that looks to the sea as well. It has a strong sea connection and ports, which gives it access to the wider world, and that was true from ancient times really. A lot of researchers now, again as you're probably well aware, tend to see Galloway not as just that bit of Scotland that happens to stick out, but as part of a wider world, a maritime world. I don't know why I'm using my hand here when I could be using the little doobree. That takes in good contacts with Ireland, with the islands, with Cumbria, the Isle of Man. This is very, very important in the history of the Galloway. Because along with the Galloway, there's another very important horse known in medieval and early modern times, and that's the Irish hobby. I suspect that they were two very closely related breeds, but with a lot of movement basically between Ireland and Scotland. But this too is sometimes hard to identify for a reason which will become clear. And you won't at all, I think, be surprised to hear that during the course of our story, some of the usual suspects turn up. Henry VIII, for one. and also Daniel Defoe. So you won't be surprised that some of the people, you know, about getting involved in Scottish history are also involved in the story of the Galloway. Okay, let's get the Galloway Nag thing out of the way. I like to do this right at the start. The Galloway horse is often called Galloway Nag. Does that reflect good quality? No. Nag was a term that was in use in England and Scotland to describe light, fast riding horses. Your everyday riding horse, the horse you would hop on to go from A to B, was often called a nag. It's so even people like William Cavendish, Duke of Newcastle, who's one of the great horsemen of the age of the 17th century, he uses the term nag, and he saw Galloway as being a very good nag, the best nag in Scotland. So if it's good enough for William Cavendish, it's good enough for me, for sure. So the term just means a small horse, a pony, sometimes indicating moderate quality, quiet-paced riding horses, all ponies and work horses. But the Galloway Nag was much, much more than that. It was much more important than that. But I've learned to use the term Galloway Nag with affection and also a certain pride, because it says something to me, it means something. We'll talk about the Garan bit later on. But Galloway Nag turns up a lot in the English literature of the 16th, 17th centuries. That was how the English knew it, and they knew it as a good horse, but they had a kind of ambivalent attitude towards it. Perhaps you won't be surprised to hear that either. Okay. Nag, by the way, comes from negen, or gnegen, an Anglo-Saxon and Germanic root verb meaning to neigh. That's it. The nag is the animal that neighs, simple as that. But it's got conflated with a Norse word, naga, which means to nag at somebody. So when you conflate the two, you get this kind of horrible hybrid thing that means somebody that's an old nag, yeah, is somebody who nags away at somebody else. But the two words are separate etymologies. Okay. So I'm going to talk now about what evidence there is for the Galloway Nag, or let's say horses from Galloway, taking it through each stage from pre-Roman, Roman, post-Roman, medieval, late medieval and modern. The term Galloway Nag only comes in fairly late, but horses were clearly very important in Galloway long, long before that. While I was doing the PhD, some really fascinating news came in, or I'm still waiting to hear the outcome, about some harness that was discovered in Borders region, which dates back to the Bronze Age, around 1000 BCE. This is horse harness. So this tells us that we know that there were harness horses wearing highly decorative harness, important harness, in Scotland 1000 BCE. The reason this is important is because, having studied Egyptology as well, one of my main interests was Egyptian chariotry and horses. They arrive in Egypt about, say, 1600 BCE. It's not a huge amount of time there. But we've got this kind of concept of places like Egypt as being obviously very important and developed cultures and so on. But when it comes to horses, there's not that much difference in time between Scotland and Egypt and the Middle East. I think this is an important point. You'll see the point, just how important that is. We're desperately all waiting to hear further views about this, but we haven't heard anything back from the people that have been studying it yet. Okay, now this is very important. How many of you have come across this this lovely artefact before? The Taw's pony cap, one or two. Actually, I should usually ask right at the start talk, how many of you have actually come across Galloway Nag before, or Galloway horse? Yeah, good, that's good. Right, the Taw's pony cap, found at Taw's, Kirkcudbright. This was designed probably for a chariot horse. It's Iron Age, obviously it's a lot later than the Bronze Age kit that's been discovered. But the significance of this beautifully decorated piece is that a friend of mine, friend and colleague, Dr. Rena Maguire, who is an Iron Age specialist, has examined this, and she says it was used. It wasn't just something that was designed for, say, putting into a river or stream as a deposition item, which often was the case. with some beautifully decorated items. It was actually used on pony, probably something a bit bigger than a Shetland. So you can see that even at this stage, horses are important. And of course, some of you will know that the horns, there's been a lot of debate whether the horns were fitted to it, the horns weren't fitted to it. And it sat on Walter Scott's desk at his home for a very long period of time before ending up in the museum. So it's kind of got a really good, strong connection to Scottish history as well as Scottish archaeology. I can't call it a Galloway Nag because the term isn't been used yet, but you know, it shows you the importance of horses in Galloway at that point. This is from Maryport in Cumbria. It's, as you'll know, that was a Roman site, but a site where there was cavalry from various places there. Particularly they were based sort of in and around Carlisle. There was a unit at Netherby, and so on. What I want to point out in this is that the drawing, hold on, back again. Yes, there we go. Here, whoever has done this drawing back in the 18th or 19th century has not understood how the horse's legs work. How many of you are horse people, have ridden a horse? No, about horses? Yeah, good. Got our hands going up there. Okay, so that horse is performing a certain gait, which puts it onto the lateral. Can you see the difference? It doesn't put it onto the lateral, rather. It's kind of, it's a walk or something else. It's trying to be depicted here. Can you see this one is on the lateral? You know, a lateral movement? The legs on the left-hand side, the near side, are coming forward almost together. And then the legs on the off side, the right-hand side, will also come forward together. This is an amble. This is a gait called an amble. What will happen is, can you also see that one foot is higher than the other on the lateral movement? So that foot is going to come down, then that foot is going to come down, then that foot is going to come down, then that one does. It's different from a trot. It's not the same as a trot, which is a diagonal movement. This is really important because the Galloways were gated. They were gated horses. They were famous for their gaits. Okay. So, here's Hilton of Campbell. I think a lot of you will be familiar with this one, the Pictish stone. This, again, not quite a Galloway nag, but I can't use the term. But again, I think you can see, and you'll see better on the next slide, that some of these horses are showing a lateral movement. They're not trotting, they're not walking, they're on the lateral, they're ambling. Okay. These are elite horses belonging to the people known as the Picts. This one illustrates it slightly better. You can see this leg here and this leg here are forward together, and then this leg and this leg will come forward. Same with this one. See, the leg's not, it's not a trot, it's not a walk, it's not any of the movements we're familiar with in the modern day in Britain. It's an amble. Okay. So, obviously you get the really quick gallop through Galloway Nag history. William the Lion is very important. We're nearly into things I can call a Galloway Nag, but not quite. William the Lion is extremely important because of a document produced during his reign by a chap called Guillaume de Clercq, a French cleric, who was probably at the court of William the Lion. And it's a rather kind of funny Arthurian style story in which a raw young lad from Galloway goes to the court of King Arthur, which is at Carlisle, of course. Everybody knows that Arthur was a northerner. So he goes to Carlisle, to Arthur's court, and he gets this wonderful horse from his father, who was a chap called Somerley, which is probably kind of taken from Somerled of the Isles. And the lad is called Fergus, so it's obviously a takeoff of Fergus or Galloway, who I'm sure many of you will have come across. And he says, Glenkens, as you may know too for a fact that it is the way of many horses in that country that they run more swiftly over quaking bog than any man could go on foot. This can look how similar that is to Walter Scott. He led a small and shaggy nag that through a bog from hag to hag could bound like any Philip stag. At this point the horses are fast. This is a really important thing. They're small, they're fast, they can get through the bog, they're trustworthy. Okay? This is one of the features that will be really important for Galloway's later time. This is William the Lion in a very typical style for monarchs of that period. His horse is ambling. But can you see kind of the human to horse ratio? This is something that you'll see in the Bayeux tapestry and things like that. It's not inaccurate, it's actually accurate. Medieval horses were not the giant horses that people think they were, like Clydesdales and Shires. 15 hounds max, you know, really, and probably a lot smaller in William the Lion's day. There's been a wonderful research project at Exeter, the Exeter Warhorse Project. They've been examining horses all over England mainly, but they have looked at some from elsewhere, and they've come to the conclusion that you simply can't tell a warhorse from its height. You know, some warhorses were small. This will be important when we get on to Robert Bruce. But it's not inaccurate. Think of big men on little horses. That's perfectly normal for the time. Okay, Robert. Some of you, I think, will be familiar with Bowers' Scotty Chronicle. I'm going to just attempt what's underneath in English rather than the medieval Scots. I think that'll be better for all of us. And when the king wist that there were in hail battle command so near, his battle girdie well array, he rode upon a little palfrey, light and jolly arrayed, his battle with an axe in one hand, and on his basnet he bore an hat of Kerbal a car, and thereupon unto Tacning and a hay crown, that he was king. So he's got his mail, he's got his helmet, he's got a sort of a padded hat for it, and he's got a crown on top of that. So everybody knows it's Robert. But he's on a little palfrey. And the story is that on his little palfrey, if I can get this right by the end, on his little palfrey, which you can see in the middle here, this is from Bower, there he is in the middle with his battle axe, and he whacks off the head or otherwise deals with De Bowen, the English knight, on a much larger horse, but much larger is completely relative here. Robert could be on a sort of what we call home-sized horse, about 13 hounds, maybe even smaller, whereas the knight may be on something like 14 to 15 hounds. But it's the little horse that wins the day because it's fast, it can get in underneath, and he can take out an English knight. So, you know, little horses are important. If you get a little horse to do the job of a big horse, that's brilliant because they're so much easier to look after, they're cheaper, they're less expensive, they're hardier, the whole thing. The English came to grief in Scotland on many an occasion because they couldn't find sufficient fodder for their larger horses, and they were used to having access to fodder, and they were used to all sorts of home comforts that they didn't get when they were on battle in Scotland, whereas you've got people that are used to living in the hills, little fast horses, easy to look after, you can go quickly wherever you need to go, and you can be a really efficient martial force. Okay. In the 14th century, we get two chroniclers called Le Bel and Froissart, again French chroniclers who were in Scotland. You may well have heard of these two. And they talked about the Cumberland Jean de Paix riding Petit Hackney, and the Scottish knights riding Bon Gros Vincent, good stout cobs, or rousies. So in France, when they came to translate this in the 19th century, you'll find footnotes in the text saying the Petit Hackney were called Galloways after the region that produced them. Now this is 19th century, but it's clear that even in France in the 19th century, this was still a consciousness that there was something important about horses from Galloway, so this is really important. There were also references to equos gradarios and equigradaria. These are ambling nags, and you find those in both Scottish and English texts. So you can see that really there is something special there about little horses of Scotland. But by golly, you have to dig for it sometimes, you really do. So Bishop Leslie, we're so close to my being able to say, this is a Galloway nag to you. He says, when our whole country through breeds up ambling horse, then chiefly Galloway, that all others they excel. I say they others excel by many J's journey. They are say swift in body, albeit they be small. That's 1561. He's saying the whole of Scotland produces fantastic ambling horses, but the ones of Galloway are the best of all. This is important again because both England and Scotland were famous for their ambling horses, and they used to send them abroad. They used to exchange them, gifts with rulers in Italy and France and Spain. But the problem is, again, tracking them down, because if they're just in the text as Hackney, or Palfrey, or Ambler, or Gradarios, that doesn't tell me precisely where on this island they came from. But we have Bishop Leslie's word that by 1561, yes, the Galloways are known to be the best in Scotland. Ta-da! 1583, enter the Galloway at last. This is a really important meeting between Patrick Adamson, who was Archbishop of St Andrews, and Whitgift, John Whitgift, who was Archbishop of Canterbury. Subject under discussion, who's going to take over when Elizabeth dies? The succession, the really big thing in England. So these are two major churchmen of England and Scotland in negotiations together. Patrick Adamson was up to something in Scotland, in England. We don't quite know what he got up to. I was doing some more research into that. But he rode down on ambling horses, and when it was time to go back, somehow he didn't have any horses. And he said, will you lend me a horse to get back to Scotland? And when I get back, I'll send you a better one, a Galloway nag. And I'll also send one to Wolsey, who we haven't even been in negotiations with, the most powerful man in England. I don't know whether either of these Galloway nags arrived. But this is also important because Whitgift was a real horseman himself. He was famous for riding into Canterbury and other towns with 1,000 horses, with a horseman in his train. He was famous for that. So if Adamson says, I'm sorry, but the horse I'm going to send you down from Scotland, better than anything you've got here, again, I think we can see the importance of the Okay. So then we get into that period of, one of the periods of extreme conflict between England and Scotland towards the end of the 16th century, when the border reivers are particularly active. There's kind of a widely held belief that the border reivers rode Gallowers. I think this is probably true. But if you look at the documentation like the border ballads, you won't find the word Galloway in there. You will find hobby and horse and other terms, but not Galloway. But a few texts do tell us that around that period and a bit later, that the Gallowers were important. Michael Drake's Polyolbion, he says, I'm going to get this right by the end. Evidence in Michael, as much the Western horseman lays, that's west of England, as the rank riding Scots hold their Galloways. And a side note explains that the Galloways are the best kind of Scottish nags. But I still find a surprising absence of use of the term Galloway in Scotland on the Scottish side, but there will be more later in the 17th century. Now, this is where the very useful and fabulous publication on Galloway, the Lost Province, came in very usefully. If they have a chance, they'd be ideal for that kind of warfare and raiding, but they don't appear as Gallowers in the texts. Okay, what does emerge largely in England is a whole thread of what I've called Galloway Nag satire that comes in from the late 16th century onwards. the Galloway becomes a really important reference point for the English when they want to, you know, don't shoot me, I'm just the messenger. I'm in Scotland now. They want to kind of have an example, a metaphor, a simile, for things that they find either sometimes admirable about Scots, sometimes problematic about Scots, sometimes things that they want to satirise or make fun of about Scots. Use a Galloway. Every single time, use a Galloway. It turns up, I don't know any other horse that has been used in literary, you know, literature other than the Galloway in this way. And I've discovered that I thought it was just a one-off to begin with, a few people like William Shakespeare and Ben Jonson. It's not. It's an actual thread in English literature. This is my argument. So we've got William Shakespeare, pistol in Henry IV. No, we're not Galloway Nags. He's drunk. He's just about to be thrown out, and he's siding up to oh gosh, he's the other character, John Falstaff and his crew in the inn, and he's going, no, you're not Galloway Nags, I'm little, I'm tough, you're not going to throw me out without fight, is what that means. In Ben Jonson, who had Scottish roots, Scottish ancestry, Bartholomew Fair, how now am I Galloway Nag, the staggers? He says this to a man who is only known as Northern, a clothier. Well, I identify him actually as James the Sixth and First, for various reasons. Again, this is in my book, and I've written various papers. Any of you who want access to these, you know, email me, contact me, and you can have all those references. But basically, a horse courser called Knockham has got Northern the clothier drunk and hungover, and when he comes staggering in the morning with a terrible hangover, well, you can see how false this is, because this is English ale in London. I mean, you know, come on. Northerners and Scots are not going to be bowled over by London. But anyway, he says, how now my Galloway Nag the staggers, and because he staggers on going, I'll never, the ale's too mighty. Well, I'm pretty sure for various reasons that this is a satire on James VI. Thomas Dekker, the Goldsworn Book, Ride Thither on thy Galloway Nag, or as thy Janet. This is a handbook for young men who telling them how to get round London quickly to all the places that young men go. The best horses are Galloway Nags or Jennets, Spanish Jennets. This is when they go to the playhouse, the inn, the brothel. It's a satirical book. Bishop Joseph Hall's satire, which includes the Galloway Miriam, which includes the Galloway in a horse racing context, which is important, and various works of John Taylor, the water poet. Now, I identify his Galloway Nag as Hamilton, the Duke of Hamilton, who played such an important role in the 17th century, engaged your army, and so forth. So, Galloway Nag, you're an English person wanting to kind of make an English audience go, that's Scottish, that is Galloway Nag, every single time. Amazing, really. It also turns up in Satire and Covenanters, and a late 17th century joke book in which a Galloway jumps right through a coach, you know, to escape when it's racing somebody. And it kind of just goes to show that the reputation of Galloway is for endurance and speed and all sorts of amazing qualities was still there as well. It's also referenced in atlases and travel books as one of Galloway's greatest and best known assets. So the kind of, the thing that we're looking at, this is a late example here. This is the Duke of Galloway on his Galloway pony he was a Tory MP of Morpeth. And this is very much a sort of a late period. There's nothing really very Scottish about him. He's in one of the late 18th, early 19th century improvers. So that he rides in this satirical print a Scotch pony commonly called Galloway. Now we'll get back to some of this in a bit. The only thing that I want to get over is how important the Galloway was in English literature. They admired it as a horse, the English, and liked it greatly, but they also found it very useful. Why are these horses so good? Well, it's the landscape, as I said before, unlimited access to unimproved grazing and pure water, natural selection, the human intervention of people selecting the best horses and gelding the others, and the focus on producing horses that are hardy, swift, with lots of endurance, utility and comfort. They're not bothered whether they're big or not, because if you get a little horse that can do all this. Multi-purpose utility, and the sheer numbers. James IV of Scotland was said to be able to raise 100,000 horses in 30 days, and the horses of the island were not. So I hope I'm starting to create a new picture of Scotland and Galloway for you, which is, wow, what a lot of horses. This is a country that's rich in horses. This is a country that has a big export trade. And the focus is slightly different from the farm horses that would be important later on, but utility is still very important. When we get to the 18th century, there's a big change in attitude after Culloden. Again, I'm pretty sure you won't be at all surprised by this. In the 1720s, Daniel Defoe's writing, in Galloway, they have the best breed of strong, low horses in Britain, if not in Europe, which we call pads. That's from the German, Dutch pard, meaning horse. And from whence we call all small, trust-strong horses Galloways. So this is why in northeast England, north of England, we still call horses Galloways. This is a habit that was generally acquired centuries ago, and you could have found it right throughout England and Wales, and beyond, still in Australia, still in parts of America, still in parts of Canada, but it's a bit thinner on the ground there. These horses are remarkable for being good pacers, strong, easy goers, hardy, gentle, well-broke, and above all, that they never tire, and are very much brought up in England on that account. 1706, John Sproul, I always hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, a Covenanter. He's also a horse salesman, basically. A horse seller. The borders on both Scots and English side came off to Dumbarton Fair. When I had some Scots Galloways, it was coveted and often bought from me, and I can aver as a truth, a Scots Galloway of 40 or 50 shillings sterling per piece will ride farther and kill, beat and founder an English gelding of 20, 30, 40 pounds sterling. You know, they're not only good, they're cheap. Value has nothing to do with cost. Value has everything to do with quality. Yeah. So people think, oh, well, that's a very expensive horse. That must be very valuable. Not really, no. What's valuable are the horses that can do the job for you. Sproul was also, oh yeah, I know them ride 40 or 50 miles a day, and then they are kept easy and can feed upon the orts of others. That's whatever the other horses left behind. They don't need rich food. Sproul was also shipping Galloways to Suriname, 50 to 52 of them, mostly all stoned horse, that's stallions and mares. So that's for a breeding program in the Suriname sugar plantations, another important aspect of Galloway history. But by the 1790s, it's very sad if you read the statistical accounts. I'm sure many of you are familiar with statistical accounts. The little Galloways are all worn out, and in some parishes, the parish ministers are so sad about this. It's like they are the ancient breed of Scotland along with the Shetlands, and they're all worn out now, and there are all these big horses coming in, and this sort of sense of nostalgia and loss. But others are like, oh, our local landowner is great, he's bringing us all these big carriage and farm horses in, and we can do so much with them. So it's all this kind of improvement thing that's going on at that time. So, but Culloden, and the sort of wreck, the ruin of Culloden afterwards, there were Galloway races held, in which the wives and girlfriends of the English soldiers participated. There were these sort of oh so amusing accounts of these Galloways being ridden, the Galloways that had been, quote, taken from the rebels. And they, because Galloways were fast, there was a type of racing called Galloway racing that was really important. That disappeared in York, funnily enough, around about the time of Culloden. It's regime change, it's Hanoverian, and Hanoverians have other priorities, you know. But they were betting enormous amounts of money on those little Galloways at Culloden. They really, really were. Okay. So, the Galloway sort of fades from history. It doesn't disappear entirely. There are still references to it. The farmers didn't stop producing horses in Galloway, but they were breeding for different markets now. They weren't breeding for racing, hunting, riding so much, as they were breeding for multi-purpose, stronger, bigger horses. And this is all part of the kind of that change. But the genes of the Galloway, so once upon a time we could have gone out into these hills and literally seen hundreds, if not thousands, of herds of semi-feral Galloways. They would have just simply been out there in the landscape and all over Scotland. But the genes live on, and I've deliberately chosen some horses that have that description that's similar to the one at the start from Ewart, where he talks about the little bay horses with the black plates. So this is a fell pony on the left. Wellbrow, can't remember his middle name, Wellbrow something or other lad. He's a fell pony. You can see they've got sort of hairy. The Galloways probably didn't have the lot of feather that the fell ponies do. The one on the right is a Newfoundland pony, and they too influenced by Galloway genes, but also by other breeds such as Dartmoor and Welsh ponies. But there's very strong Scottish and Irish culture still in Newfoundland, very strong. Newfoundland. Okay, so those are two probably of the better known breeds. The Clydesdale, the horse that everybody knows now, along with Shetland, as a Scottish horse. People identify it being a Scottish horse. If you look back to the 19th century, you'll find several accounts that call them Galloway Clydesdales. Because they were using the Galloway mares that were bigger and stronger at this point to breed with imported stallions. The Duke of Hamilton was very much to the fore in this. Dukes of Hamilton, to get the coal, basically. It was a lot of this history is about coal, the industrial history. But they produced the Clydesdale, and so there are Galloway genes in the Clydesdale, for sure, absolutely certain. Like I say, you come across the Galloway Clydesdale in something. The thoroughbred, yes. In 2010, researchers Mim Bauer and Emmeline Hill, who was from a racing family herself, they have come to the conclusion that speed in the thoroughbred probably came from a single Galloway mare sometime in the past 300 years. I agree with this because this is what all my research supports. I sort of set out partly to find out whether there was other evidence to suggest this, and I'm confident that there is. But we have a problem in that we have no remains, no skeletal remains, identified as Galloways or hobbies. Eclipse, the racehorse, the thoroughbred racehorse, his skeleton, I think it's now at the Racing Museum, it's a revered relic. The Godolphin Arabian, the imported, so-called Arabian, more likely to be a Turkmen horse, but you know, these are all kind of discussed, or probably a barb from North Africa. He's buried in Cambridge, but what has emerged is a narrative that's about largely English southern aristocracy and their imported horses, the Barbs, the Arabs, the Turks. And the people who were originally breeding the races in the country, often Gaelic speaking, will have been put on one side and their narrative has been forgotten. Well, you can see the obvious reason why, because the literate and money-owning side of it had all the power and the influence in order to be able to do that. So you've now got a narrative where three stallions, the Godolphin Barb, the Dali Arabian and the Bailey Turk, who one commentator thinks was probably foaled in County Durham, North Yorkshire, very close to County Durham. It has got this, they've got this whole kind of mythology around them, but our little Galloways and hobbies don't even enter into it any longer. So this is one of my big missions, is to kind of set people straight on this. Any of you come across History Rage, the podcast? No? It's where historians go and have a really good rant. It's going to be on there in September. Okay, so you can see these are, when I sometimes call the Galloway half-jokingly the most influential horse in the world that nobody's ever heard of, I mean it. I really, really mean it. The speed gene is also in Shetlands, which of course people find absolutely hilarious. But again, it goes back to this Scottish thing of wanting a lot of qualities in a little horse. The Shetlands were used for all sorts of things, not just kind of carrying a bit of seaweed and that kind of thing. They used to carry people, they used to draw carts, they used to do farm work, they used to do all sorts of things. Okay, so we can probably get back to that. Now we're going to be very, very provocative here. There's our Pictish rider, Lady Rider. There we go, you can see the horses on the lateral there. This is an American breed of horse called the American Saddlebred, which also has a lateral gait. But he's not showing his lateral gait here. He's not showing a lateral gait here, they're on a diagonal gait, one of the other stepping paces that isn't on the lateral. But I like to show this one because America's first horse breed was a breed called the Narragansett Pacer, now extinct, likely to have been bred from imported Galloways, possibly hobbies as well. So I like to kind of show this one, to be a bit provocative, and show how, can we still see the lines of the Narragansett Pacer, and behind that, the Galloway, in one of America's most prestigious stated riding horses, the American Saddlebred. I'd like to think so. Obviously I'm a bit biased on that topic. Okay, so I'm not sure how we're doing the time, but I wanted to leave you plenty of time for questions. If I've galloped through that a bit too quickly, I'm more than happy to talk some more. So what I hope you will take away, can you see these little horses here? Do you know what the Galloway, these are called Yorkshire Galloways? The term is just used so widely, and you can get people talking about Scotch Galloways. So it gets a bit funny in the years of the Industrial Revolution. Scotland was a really important place for raising horses with a flourishing export trade. The Galloways were widely recognised as the best horses in Scotland, especially by the English, although they have this funny attitude towards them sometimes. A good horse absolutely does not have to be big. In medieval and early modern times, function mattered, not breed. Not the name of the breed, not the qualities of the breed. Function is what mattered. What will that horse do? That's a riding horse, that's a war horse, that can be a riding and a war horse possibly. And horse breeds change over time as market priorities change. So the Galloways change from little fast riding horses and beautiful riding horses, because the Scots also love beautiful horses. They change to more utility farm ponies, and then they changed again into, sort of morphed into all the modern breeds, put their genes into modern breeds. So for me, the Galloway Nag story has really only just begun, because I know there's a lot more to be discovered about the Galloway Nag. That is my research to date. It's just a lifetime's research to date. If I have another lifetime, I'll go back and say more. These are pony and Galloway races at the Renala Club of Progress Day. So the term Galloway remained in use in some quarters for a type of racing, right into the 20th century actually, and sort of some confusion over how high a Galloway actually is. It varies over time. But the name had stuck because people associated Galloways with racing, particularly. So you still come across pony and Galloway races. Now what I'm going to try and do now, I don't know whether this is going to work, but this is the Icelandic horse, which I think is probably the closest thing we've got to a Galloway today, for the simple reason that it's gated. You can see it's on the lateral there. That foot's going to come down, then that foot's going to come down, then that foot's going to come down, and then that foot's going to come up. But because the Vikings were actually taking horses from Ireland and Scotland, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if the little Icelandic horses are actually the closest thing we've got to a Galloway. There's another horse breed in America which is extremely fast, called the Alabama racking horse, which nobody's ever heard of. But one of those was clocked at doing 50 miles an hour in the 1970s. No racehorse has ever come anywhere near that. And that's a gated horse. So I think possibly the Icelandic horse is the closest thing that we've got in the modern world to what the Galloways look like and how they move. Now, at the bottom here there's a link, but I'm not sure if this is going to work. Do you? Yep. Aha, brilliant. Okay, cool. That's excellent. Excellent. The 5 gates of the Icelandic Galloways.
Shall I play now?
Yeah. That's quite nice view. So there we go. The familiar walk, a 4-beat gate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The trot. Diagonal. But because he's a gated horse, he doesn't quite do the diagonal the way some of our ponies do, where the diagonal hits the ground. Yeah, can you see that? He's kind of a little bit of his gait getting in there. But just you watch that, it's really strong. Can you also see how he's sitting in the saddle and he's not moving? These were comfy riding horses. You could go for hundreds of miles on these horses in comfort. So here we go, gallop. Again, 4 beats with a moment of suspension. This is another gait that we're familiar with from modern horses. Look at that horse go. You can see him really roll up, can't you? Yeah. Look at that horse go. He's only little, he'll only move out under 12 hands, isn't it? Okay, turns. This is one of the specialist gaits. Okay. See how he's on the lateral, but not as strongly as on the lateral as some gaits. And look how high those legs go. There we go. You see, foot comes down, foot comes down. They're on the same side each time. Right? Not diagonal thing. It's a really super video, this one. Much easier to explain to you what's going on. Now, look at the lateral on that. Can you see? Near side, offside, near side, offside, near side, offside, near side, offside, near side. But look how he's sitting in the saddle. He's not moving. He's not moving. He's so comfortable. So comfortable. And you ever tried to sit to the trot? Yes, you'll see the difference. Could you also see how that was a 4-beat movement? It wasn't like both feet came down at the same time on each side. It was 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So it's what we call a 4-beat lateral. Absolutely love that video. And it explains what I'm talking about, really, much better than I can do by doing a horse leg movements. Thanks very much, that's brilliant. I'm glad you could say that.
Okay, thanks very much, Miriam. That's fantastic. Learned a hell of a lot there. We've got some time for some Q&A now. There's a few things that occurred to me during, so if you think of some questions to ask, but I'll maybe kick the thing off. You're talking about the genetic inheritance really of the Galloway, potentially being in Iceland and such like. So if there was an archaeological dig in Galloway that uncovered the bones and could get the DNA, could it then be compared with breeds like that one to give a more definitive take on whether or not it basically is a Galloway?
Totally. That's kind of my holy grail. I think it's a big pity that we've got kind of the DNA of other horses. And when you think of how many the horses there were in Galloway, I mean, it's just like, but they were so taken for granted in a sense. That people, I think, all thought they'd always be there. It's a bit like bicycles or something, you know. They were there. They were easy to catch. You went out and grabbed yourself one, you rode where you wanted, popped it back in the hills. They've been there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's like, but we have no positively identified remains of a Galloway or an Irish hobbit. I think this is extremely sad. If one were to turn up in a Galloway dig, yes, that would be fantastic. And also, any of you who are involved in farming families, yeah, you might sort of consider, do you recall any of your relatives telling you about horses, where horses might have been buried, or that kind of thing from later times? Yes, we're in desperate need of this kind of
Okay,
information.
so we need to go on some Birkin hair type.
Let's dig up those ponies.
Horse body remains. It does surprise me that archaeological digs haven't discovered that kind of thing in this area. It's also quite sad that there was not an earlier Galloway Horse Preservation Society set up to keep this thing.
Yeah.
The other question I had was, you talked about export to Suriname. Where is that? In the Dutch East Indies or something?
West Indies.
West
Yes, to the sugar plantations.
Is it possible that in sort of far-flung places like that, these horses still exist without having been adulterated to the extent that they have been, in the Western world?
Yes, I think there is that possibility. I am in touch with a couple of people who are working on studying the slave trade in particular, and we're obviously interested in knowing how the slave trade and the horse trade work together really in these situations. So I think it would be great if we could do that. One's at Rhode Island University, and hopefully we might be able to find something from somewhere else. Yes,
Galloway lives on.
Yes, it does. I mean, it does. It's kind of there's so many ways of looking at this. Obviously, as an equine historian and a horse person, I feel the same pang that the people back in the 18th century were feeling. It's like, it's so sad they've gone. But we can also say, well, no, they live on in other horse breeds. So we say, things change, we've had the age of the horses, and now we've had the age of the sort of forestry, and then we've had the age of the wind turbines and stuff changes, it happens. But obviously, from my own perspective, yes, I do feel that kind of personal connection and sadness that something so important that my people, the north of England, miners, and that they called them gallows and still call them gallows. So this is my kind of personal connection with it.
Okay, let's throw open any questions for her.
I think I know why you won't find any bones in Galloway. I used to work on archaeological animal bones, and I've got horses. Our acid soils, we've got rubbish bone preservation.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, because also family links to your side of the country, I use pit ponies. There was an awful pit disaster in, I think, the 1860s at New Hartley Colliery.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you know about it?
It
gives me nightmares. Because they had pit ponies down there, and two of the men, including one of the managers, went down to rescue the ponies, and they all died. Just up the road from my family's village. So whether you could find more evidence from Galloway ponies that were used in the pits, maybe in the north of England.
That's a really good point. There's two issues there. The first one is that they were using the term so generically that and they were, by the sort of late 19th, early 20th century, they were bringing the ponies in from all over. They brought them from Russia, from Iceland, from America. It was a real mix of ponies. It was like a market, wherever you could get the ponies. But a lot did come from Ayrshire and Galloway. They did. At least in the early days. Again, identifying them is a real kind of problem. But and of course, in the northeast, Shetlands were the main ponies used. And that was because of, Lord Londonderry. He bought the Shetland studs on Shetland, and he started to breed a particular type of Shetland pony. It's really interesting, you still see them, that type in some ponies alive today. They have a kind of a flat neck and back, and this was so that they could fit into the spaces underground in the collieries in northeast England, where women and children had been working previously. Some of them were just this high, and the women and children had been crawling along and pulling the trucks themselves. So when the legislation came in to say, we're not going to have that any longer, the ponies are going to take over, he picked the smallest ponies he could find to work underground in their place. It was like a commercial, operation, change thing. So Yeah, it's just it's so that's our big problem. While we can't do that, we have all sorts of DNA specialists kind of being able to make claims about other DNA they've worked on, and we just can't do that. Very frustrating.
Any other questions in the middle here?
Just going to say, maybe also it's hard to find remains because, I mean, everybody knows what happens to poor old worn out horses. Once they get to the end of their life, they're not entirely treated well and given a decent burial. They'd probably go off with dog meat or something. And
Yeah, I
boiled
mean,
up with
that's
glue or something.
perfectly true. Yeah, that's exactly what used to happen. They'd just be sent off. It's only a very special kind of horse or a special individual horse that ever gets buried. And do you know the interesting story of Lord Dacre? Lord Dacre, one of the Lords Dacre, who was buried upright in his tomb on a horse. And as soon as I heard the story, I was like, that's a Galloway. I must find out about that horse. Well, as is often the case, the skull appears to have ended up at the British Museum. So whether I'm going to be able to pursue that further, I don't know. But that, you know, it's cases like that, it's instances like that where some famous person chooses to bury their horse because it was really, really important to them that we can actually find the DNA. Yeah.
But it's difficult because you have to know that was Galloway if you then want to compare it to an Icelandic, for example.
Exactly.
It could be anything. And
it could be anything, and I mean, what it's most likely to be is a genetic mix, of course, because we're all a genetic mix. But you know, I don't think people in Galloway were particularly thinking of purity. They were thinking of good horses. That's a good horse. I'll allow that horse to breed. That one's a good horse, but it's not a good horse for a stallion. I'll gallop that one and I'll sell it. I'll get some money. So this is how horse breeders would be thinking. So yeah, it's yeah.
any other questions? Up at the back.
Yeah, I was interested in the gated aspect, which
Yeah.
is very distinctive and therefore points towards breeding for the gate. In other words, the Galloway could be very generic, but for the gate. So, given that they own it, I was immediately thinking of the Todd. And before that, I've been thinking, oh, I wonder how it's related to the Highland pony. But I'm just wondering how, I don't know anything about how long it would take to breed out the gate.
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And a lot of horse breeds, modern horse breeds, they're naturally gated. In fact, they've discovered gated genes in horses going right back literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. There's been a recent research paper published about horses, I forget how many million years ago, which he, through looking actually at hoof prints, yeah, in solidified clay going back hundreds of, if not millions of years, he's discovered that this is gated movement. So what happened after Culloden is that these little gated horses, it's progress. Carriages are becoming more widely used, coaches are becoming more widely used. You want trotting horses for those. Hanoverians want big cavalry horses, they want those to trot. The gated horses in Britain slowly over time lost their value because there was kind of less of that kind of riding going on, but once they were very famous. And it seems to me that you can lose it very quickly. I think there's a message to us here about heritage in general. That's like how quickly you can lose it, if you don't kind of watch out for it and take care of it and keep an eye on it. Certainly, by the 19th century, I imagine there were very few gated horses left. They were selecting for trotting instead, yeah. Very good question.
One or two more in front here.
We had Frisian cross happening there at Fortune 3.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence there could be any Galloway back there?
In Frisians?
Yeah.
Okay, the modern Frisian, a modern Frisian, is Anthony Dent had a theory about fell ponies, which was that they were related.
It looked very much like
that they were related.
Horse,
Yeah, the modern Frisian's pretty big though. It's a lot bigger than if you go back far enough, you go back to Frisia in Friesland in Roman times. They've got pretty well little ponies, is what they've got. The modern Frisian, interestingly, developed through a similar kind of path. it was really a farm horse for quite a long period of time.
Yeah.
It was a good all-rounder, like the Cleveland Bay, basically is what it was, a horse that would do anything, yeah.
Well, she was a driving.
Yes.
We were young when we had her, and
Yeah.
it turned out to be a lovely ride.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're absolutely fabulous horses. Connection to the Galloway, I wouldn't argue that strongly, no, I wouldn't,
No.
I would have said there was a particular
This was
connection.
animals.
Ambled, she ambled. Yours ambled,
I don't
No.
know,
right.
because I wouldn't have known about that when I
Right.
was driving.
Ah, right.
But, you know, it is a much smoother pace.
It's a much smoother pace,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I might have got it at times.
Right. Yeah. That'd be interesting because it kind of associate them more with the period when trotting was really coming in. Because if you go back to medieval times, that's your only way to get around in the shape, it's on horseback. So you want the most comfortable horse you
She
can
was
find.
lucky sitting
Yeah.
trot, so
Mm.
she could have,
If you've got a comfy sitting trot.
yeah, very good.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got time maybe for one more, if there is one.
A couple of points and a question.
Mm.
The carapace that you've written down is found at Torres Cubry. It was found at Torres Douglas in the Moss. You may have meant the Cubbershire.
Oh, I did, yes. I beg your pardon, yes, I did, yes. I did. That's right.
The second thing, I think if you looked in some of the trophy cabinets of all the local shows, you might, by the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was, as you say, the generic name for a small handy horse. But there are trophies for a Galloway horse, on, you know, a trophy named for a Galloway horse.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah, now that's worth knowing. And I'll tell you why. I've been through a lot of the local shows, agricultural shows, literature, and there doesn't seem, you know, the term Galloway seems, for a horse, seems to have pretty well disappeared by certainly the middle of the 1800s. So if you're saying that there were still Galloway horse classes in shows late 1800s and early 19th, yes, I would love to know more about those, definitely.
And my question is, I note that you haven't mentioned the Spanish origin. In the early statistical accounts, which were generally written by ministers of the parish,
Yes.
one in Wittenshire said there is a small breed of handy horse which is reputedly descended from a Spanish stallion that swam ashore.
Because it's not true. It's absolutely not true. Robert Beck, who wrote the book about the aeroscape riding, he went into all that and he discovered that there were no cavalry horses, no stallions on board. He got in touch with the Spanish consul and saw the bills of lading, and there were no Spanish horses on
But
board.
all the several hundred Spanish cavalry that were in the Armada, the horses were thrown overboard.
No, they weren't on the ships, I'm sorry.
They
They absolutely were not on
all
the ships.
stallions.
No, they were not on the ships. They were not on the ships. I'm sorry, if you've seen the bill of ladings, they were not on the ships. They were in the Low Countries waiting to be picked up and taken. And the ships were carried off by storms round the coast anyway. There were absolutely, I can promise you, there were no stallions on board ships. There were some mules, there were some pack animals, they all ended up
There
on
might still
board.
be a Spanish connection because there's also a legend that the Earl of Galloway at
Yeah.
Newbury introduced the Spanish stallion.
Yes. Yeah, I have heard this legend, but you won't find any documentation to back it up. If you find documentation to back it up, great. But you see, I don't see why we need to have these myths. I don't see why we need them. Why cannot horses in Galloway just be good because they're horses in Galloway? Why? These are the kind of myths that people use for other horse breeds. Oh, that was a great horse because they imported the Spanish stallion. So obviously it was good. Did you know the Spanish was importing horses from us? They were importing horses from Britain. In the Spanish documents of the early 1600s, they're saying the hackneys from England, but I suspect some of them weren't from England, but were from Scotland at all, are the best. We can't get hackneys of this quality. Henry VIII was sending hackneys to the Gonzaga family of Mantua, who were breeding horses for the Mantuan Palio. And can I also tell you this? I didn't want to go too deeply into the racehorse side of things, but there was correspondence between Henry VIII's, well, I don't quite know what you call it, representative at the Mantuan court in Italy. And they were desperate to get their hands on some of these Mantuan racehorses, and he says, because the best horses we have on the island of Britain are the Cavalli Corridori di Scozia, the Scottish running horses. And my master, Henry VIII, it's the only thing that comforts him at the moment. I think it's around about the time Anne Boleyn is watching the Scottish running horses. They were the most famous racehorses on the island of Britain. Okay, so you know, I mean, when it comes to horse breeding, yes, certainly people will acquire good horses. They may get them from Spain, they may get them from somewhere else. When you look at the kind of the coming and going of horse breeding, yes, horses change hand, horses end up in some interesting places. Theoretically, yes, there can be people importing stallions from here, there and everywhere. But what really matters is that the quality, in the case of Galloway, is the quality of the stock you've got out on the hills. This is what really matters. This is what gives the Galloway its edge, its superiority. So this is my hill I'm going to die on.
Okay, on that myth busting note, I think the question came to an end. Very interesting. I get the impression you could talk about these horses all afternoon.
Yeah, probably.
I'd like to then just hand over to Anne Errington for a vote of thanks.
Thank you. Well, I'm sitting there going, yes! I had a Clydesdale. I'm delighted to think that he had Galloway Nag blood in him. I have a Fell, who when I call, you're right, Nag, people go, don't be so insulting.
No,
I can now
exactly.
say, it's because you're a good horse.
Exactly.
And I have also got connections with, well, I know someone who has worked for the Godolphin stables, so I'll be able to say to them, you know your flying racehorses, they come from the Galloway Nag. So thank you very much, Miriam. That was fantastic.
Right, my job here is done.
Lucky.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. You just stand up to those Godolphin lot. Yeah.
I would have brought Lucky in. She often don't like to come in. She would have loved to have heard she was a good horse. Thank you.
Right.